Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
I'm Chris Clements.
Yeah, we are honored today to have with us here. We're in Washington, as you can see. We've been doing a lot of these episodes lately from here in Washington at CPI. But we've got Ian Pryor, who is an expert in fighting the woke agenda in the schools.
God bless you, sir.
And you've done this because it's actually happened personally. I mean, it's up front and personal. He's written the book Parents of the World Unite, and he's been a part of this. Loudon County's been kind of like
ground zero,
right? Ground zero for this.
Loudon County helped. I mean, safe to say, helped elect a Republican governor in Virginia for sure.
Yeah. Did he call you and thank you?
Yeah, I mean,
probably should have.
Certainly, I think that's right, though. I mean, I think that you look at what happened in Loudon County. Governor Youngkin, I think, won 44% in Loudon County, which, not winning it, but to perform that way in Loudon, plus what happened in Loudon really resonating throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia and beyond, I think really helped deliver him that extra boost he needed to really win a close race. Now, there were certainly other things that happened outside of Loudon. Terry McAuliffe's famous, I don't think parents should be telling schools what to teach. Right. The NSBA memo followed very quickly by the Merrick Garland memo. It certainly didn't help Terry McAuliffe as intended either. But we had been really pushing on various levels for about a year at that point, starting with COVID. I hadn't been involved in the school closure issue, but it really started for me, probably later that summer when I started seeing some of the contracts they were giving out to these equity consultants and how they were, really, the school system was really pushing that. And then it all, sort of blew up in March of 2021, where you had this private Facebook group that had 6 school board members, or Commonwealth attorney, dozens of teachers and administrators that, wanted to target parents who were speaking at school board meetings in opposition to what the school board was doing. And I found myself on that list.
Unbelievable.
That's unbelievable.
So you were targeted personally.
Yeah. I mean, it was, I was put on there twice. They wanted to publicly expose people, infiltrate their groups, and even hack their websites. And I had written an op-ed about what I found from a group called the Equity Collaborative that had, made $500,000 from Loudon County Public Schools in 2019 alone, stayed on at the rate of $625 an hour for the next 2 years. So I wrote that op-ed, and that got me put on the list, as did going to one school board meeting at that point in time for expressing concerns about how they were chipping away at the First Amendment rights of teachers and students. So I guess that's a problem.
Now, so walk us through how you got involved. I mean, obviously you saw this, but what was it that triggered it, and then what did that fight look like over the course of the duration of what you cover in the book?
Well, I think that the triggering point really didn't have as much to do with Loudon County Public Schools, but it was, between COVID and then post George Floyd, you saw a lot of this cancel culture stuff coming to rise. And in Loudon County, there were 2 incidents. One was in the summer of 2020, where they tried to cancel a wine bar for selling T-shirts, "Drunk Wives Matter." But they had actually pulled that down after the George Floyd incident. But nevertheless, the mob still came for that, and it made the news, and it was a big deal. And then later that year, there was an article in the New York Times about a girl who, several years earlier had used a slur in a video when she got her license. Okay. She was 15 years old, or her learner's permit. Kids saved it for like 3 years and then made it go viral during the George Floyd protests. And this girl got her cheerleading scholarship taken away at a school and basically was asked to leave the school just as she was coming in. And, I thought to myself, wow, that is problematic that you have really the mob going after a restaurant for something that was just ludicrous, and a teenage girl who probably didn't know any better saying something not necessarily maliciously, even though it's obviously something you don't say, and trying to ruin her life. And that was kind of the setting that brought me to finding out what some of the things that were going on in the school, particularly how they were, the SPLC again had this teaching tolerance resource. And I read an article about how Loudon County Public Schools was using that as a resource for teacher trainings. It was very, all equity, anti-racism. And, I started going down that path and exploring. I'd never wasn't really familiar with these things until that summer. And ultimately that led me to write the article I did in the Federalist in, I think, September of 2020. But again, I wasn't, and as I explained in the book, it was just sort of one engagement that I had. And then I went and spoke at a school board meeting about another policy where, they wanted to punish teachers who spoke poorly about their equity commitment, even off campus. And so I went and spoke about that and a dress code that I thought was overbroad and vague under the Constitution. And, then I thought, well, maybe I'll just keep an eye on this and send my kids to private school if I feel like this school system isn't serving them the way it should. And, that's when this whole private Facebook group thing came about. And it really, what that did was it galvanized a bunch of different groups. You had people that had been going to school board meetings and protesting, critical race theory concepts in school. You had people that since the summer before had been trying to get schools reopened. And now you had a bunch of people, 60 to 70 people that were put on this Facebook list. And we decided, well, we're going to do something about it. And having worked in, politics in Washington for the previous 10 years, understanding, well, we got to have a vehicle to do this. So we started a PAC under Virginia law called Fight for Schools. And then what we did was we drafted removal petitions, which is very different than other states. Other states, you can go recall somebody. And if you get the threshold, you have a new election. Virginia is not like that, unfortunately. Virginia, you go get the signatures, then you have to present them to court, and then your local Commonwealth attorney is supposed to advocate for the petition signers. Unfortunately, our Commonwealth attorney is Buddha Bibarai, Soros-backed, who herself was in the group. But we said, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And we drafted up the petitions for the 6 school board members that were in there and said, look, you violated Freedom of Information Act laws, you violated First Amendment rights, you violated your own code of conduct. And off we were to the races, trying to get the signature to get into court.
Wow. It's amazing. So what's happened in the subsequent months and I guess years from that?
Well, it really, we were getting these signatures. We needed something like 17,000. And, the first couple of weeks, it was slow going. We got 1,000, 1,500. And then on a totally different issue, the school was proposing this policy, which is called Policy 8040. That was where, boys could use girls' room if they consistently asserted that they were a girl, could play on intramural sports, and that students and teachers would have to refer to kids by their preferred gender pronouns. So we had a teacher by the name of Tanner Cross, a gym teacher at Leesbury Elementary, prior to this policy being passed, went to speak at public comment at a school board meeting and spoke in opposition to the policy. I mean, this speech was not something that, is going to go viral, right? He wasn't angry. He was calm, composed, and just laid out why he had issues with it. Well, they suspended him.
Yeah, I remember this.
And then it became national news.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, everybody's looking at us and saying, where do we sign that petition? At the same time, nobody knew about this, but a girl was sexually assaulted in a bathroom by a gender fluid male wearing a skirt. And nobody knew about it, but it was that very same week. So you had these two moments dealing with this one policy really converging on each other at the end of May. June 22nd, that famous school board meeting where you have pictures of all the parents singing the national anthem. Well, that's where the dad got arrested. They shut down public comment, and for a while, it was like the narrative was parents are insurrectionists, parents are, going to school board meetings, they're alt-right, they were sent here by, the GOP. And it turns out, we later find that this kid who committed the sexual assault was quietly moved to another school.
And he did it again.
And then when we went back and watched the tape of that school board meeting, the superintendent had been asked, as it relates to this policy, have there been sexual assaults in our bathrooms? And he said, to my knowledge, there are no records of sexual assaults in our bathrooms. Well, that turned out to be a lie. And then it was, that was really the third inflection point. And I think by that point, everybody started to realize that this school board puts politics over safety. It puts politics over academics. It puts politics over public service.
And
it was game on at that time.
Yeah.
Because it blew up on every major conservative platform. It was the news of the day.
Even on legacy media, NBC News was out there, and I was watching the left freak out that NBC News was covering this and actually doing a pretty decent job covering it, I think they realized that, well, we're in some serious trouble.
Well, and that superintendent was incredibly corrupt, it turns out.
Right. Well, what all happened after that, we did
Didn't
end up
the
getting
AG go after him?
Yeah, we did end up going into court. One of the school board members resigned after we successfully moved to intervene, disqualified the prosecutor. But once Youngkin and Miyares won, Miyares said, look, I'm going to investigate. So Youngkin authorized Miyares to investigate. Usually it would be something the local prosecutor would do, but here that wasn't going to happen. So Miyares initiates an investigation, and then we learned, I think in April of 2022, that a special grand jury had been convened. Fast forward to December 5th, the special grand jury report comes out, confirms what we had been talking about, that the administration knew, the school board knew, the administration really went to great lengths to cover their arrears as opposed to protecting students, and they were directly responsible for that second sexual assault. Now, the school board had commissioned an independent report right after the election, or right before the election, and announced it after the election.
Try to cover their butts.
We tried to FOIA that. They said, you can't have it, attorney-client privilege. Well, I said, well, wait a minute. It's either independent and you got to turn it over, like you said, or it's attorney-client privilege and you lied. We sued for it. We weren't successful in April of 2022. But by the time you get to December, now they've got this special grand jury report. Now the school board comes out and says, well, we're so glad that there's no criminal issues here and no indictments. That just shows that this was political. But we're going to fire the guy anyway because we were misled. So we're like, all right, we'll release the independent report then so we could, verify if you were misled. They got ahead of themselves because when they learned about the special grand jury report, they didn't read the full press release, which said the grand jury is still impaneled. And of course, the next week, we find out that the superintendent had been indicted on 3 misdemeanor counts, and the school spokesperson, the person who communicates with the community, was indicted for felony perjury. And that trial is actually, in June of 2023.
Wow. It's unbelievable.
It's really interesting because it seems, the left in our school boards obviously had an agenda, wanted to push that agenda. And yet when parents spoke out against it, even the federal government got involved and started labeling parents terrorists.
Yeah, and I think that's where we see that they've fully overstepped. The NSBA memo and the subsequent Garland memo, the NSBA memo actually relied on, in one of the footnotes, the incident in Loudon County where the dad was arrested. That comes out before the second sexual assault. Once everyone figured out, wait a minute. You got Merrick Garland up there getting questioned on Loudon County from Senate Judiciary, from House Judiciary. The whole thing unraveled pretty quickly. Yeah. And the benefit inured to Glenn Youngkin, who was like, look, I've been speaking up for parents for the past several months. And now we see that they're doing it again with the Southern Poverty Law Center, right? Yeah. Well, we're going to brand Moms for Liberty a hate group. We're going to brand this another hate group. And, it's no coincidence that I think one of the individuals that's, in charge of this intelligence report for the SPLC was meeting with, high-level staffers from the Biden administration just a couple of months ago. So we'll see. But it strikes me as the left has fully embraced the radical elements of the Democrat Party to the exclusion of just about anybody else. So, if you're a moderate Democrat and you say, listen, I may be for, social safety nets. I may be for, worker protections, free speech, traditional sort of liberal values in our country, right? Yeah. Well, they're not good enough anymore, because if you oppose, for example, a boy using a girl's room, well, then you are not ideologically pure enough for us, for this new left. So you can go hang out with the conservatives. And so
racists.
Everybody, if you considered
the
yourself...
bigoted realists.
I think Elon Musk tweeted that meme where it was, you've got somebody, a stick figure, and he's like just to the left of center in 2006. And then it just moves, and now the stick figure is on the right, and everyone's like, you're right winger.
Right.
They've all moved to the far left of normalcy.
What now? This all was what your experience was in Loudon County. This is happening other places, right?
This invigorated, a movement across the country, which is why you have groups like Moms for Liberty and others who are challenging school boards, or showing up at school boards and challenging the status quo.
Yeah, it really has, and that's one of the
not violently.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that it's great to see people unifying here, and you look at the things that are being done, the legislation that's being passed, and what the legislation actually is, and then what the left's narrative is. I mean, they're two completely different things, right? So, giving the community the ability to say, look, I'm not sure that book should be in our school library. Well, now that's banning books.
Yeah, I'm not sure that pornographic book should be in our library.
Well, I'll tell you,
for kindergartners.
I think it was Hakeem Jeffries on the House floor said, "Oh, they don't want to teach kids about the Holocaust." So I thought, well, let me just go take a look in our school library. So I went and picked a book about kid being trans, right? And you've got 30 copies, 40 copies, 50 copies. I'm like, let me just put in Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. 0 copies, right? I mean, you think if you want to learn about how the Holocaust came to be, the horrors of Nazi Germany, that's a book you'd read.
That's pretty common.
Roots, they only had 3 copies of Roots throughout the entire 92 schools in the district. Only 3 copies of Roots. Now they'll say, well, wait a minute, those books are really long. Okay, well, Stephen King's The Stand and It is really long, and those are in the libraries. So, I mean, what do you want?
Yeah. Exactly.
The whole world has gone topsy-turvy.
Yeah, I mean, it really has, and it's frustrating to watch because, you talk to a lot of parents and they'll say, well, my kids are in private school, or we homeschool, or my kids are out of school. But look, this is the future of America that's being educated by our public schools. And the biggest problem I see is that not that the left necessarily believes in these issues, it's they don't want to debate the issues. They want to shut down the debate on the issues because they know they won't win on those issues. So, we went back and forth in the spring of 2021 about critical race theory. And said, well, we're not teaching critical race theory. I said, well, yeah, no kidding. You're not teaching critical race theory like it's physics. You also don't teach meritocracy, but you apply meritocracy. It's a fundamental, policy or fundamental thing that you use for achievement.
Yeah.
And they would just gaslight and gaslight and gaslight. It's like, why don't you just say that, yes, we are doing this. Here's why we're doing it. Okay, great. Here's why it's a bad idea. Let's have that debate.
No, because they can never win on the issues.
Right.
So they have to shut down debate. And that's essentially what the Southern Poverty Law Center is trying to do with Moms for Liberty. Trying to ostracize them to the point where they can no longer be heard.
Right. I mean, because you look at the history of the Southern Poverty Law Center, very different in the past from what they are now. But they still have that clout of being able to label these hate organizations, and then, oh yeah, no, the FBI is like, we're going to start looking into these Catholic organizations that the SPLC flagged. If you're running a group and you get flagged by them, there's concern. There's concern. Like, how is this going to impact me? How is this going to impact my spouse, my children, if I'm a member of a local Moms for Liberty chapter?
Yeah, it's Stalinism all over again in our own country.
Now, this next question is a bit of a layup, but because I think the first answer I would give is if you're a parent and you're in a school district, you want to know how to deal with it, by the book.
Yes.
You have the handbook. Parents of the World Unite, How to Save Our Schools from the Left's Radical Agenda. What are the basics? What do parents need to be on the lookout for? What do they need to do?
Well, I think from a broad perspective, parents need to be very strategic. I mean, they have to build a coalition, but they also have to have an end goal in mind, and they have to be flexible. We started out with these removal petitions, but by 2022, we were focused on getting justice for the victims and really exposing how they covered up a sexual assault to pass a policy that the majority of the county really didn't want. The biggest thing I could say is that these individuals are not public servants, they're political servants.
Sure.
And if you focus too much on one area of bad conduct, you might miss another area of bad conduct. And the analogy I always use is sort of Elliot Ness and Al Capone. Elliot Ness didn't get Al Capone on bootlegging or murder, which he probably would have wanted to, but he got him on tax evasion. And that's really sort of my guiding philosophy, is that find where they're breaking the law, find where they are abusing their position of power. It may be something very boring, but something that you actually have them dead to rights on. Whereas
Great
some
point.
of this other stuff it's very fluid and it's tough to pin down. Like how are you going to sue them on this issue? Well, you don't necessarily have the case, but hey, if they're violating the Freedom of Information Act every school board meeting, well, there's your answer.
Excellent advice. Good. Anything else you would suggest? I mean, this is. I mean, it's not going away, right? The left is going to.
As long as the federal government and the left is doubling down on their desire to shut it all down, it's
right.
You're going to continue to embolden parents to speak out.
I mean, I would say that a lot of people aren't necessarily paying attention to these issues, right? And, I didn't vote in the last local election we had in 2019. I had just moved there. I'd always voted in congressionals, gubernatorial, statewides, federal elections, but local, I'm like, I just moved here. I don't know what the issues are. And I worked at the Department of Justice. I worked in politics. I'm a lawyer. If I'm not doing that, then that means there are a lot of people just like me that are ideologically aligned with you, but they just need to know what's going on. And they may be busy, they may be working, they may have young kids that aren't fully in the school system yet, or in kindergarten or preschool. And so they don't know what to look for. It's important that people, find families like that are entering the school system, to make sure that there's a bigger coalition, and that you're not leaving potential voters or potential influencers, off the team, because they just haven't been informed because they're busy.
Yeah. Well, go buy the book. It's on Amazon. I'm looking at it right now. Parents of the World Unite: How to Save Our Schools from the Left's Radical Agenda. Ian, where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter, at Ian D. Pryor. That's where I do all my talking. I don't really do with Facebook and Instagram, and
That's okay. Save that for the
save
the
that
private
for
stuff.
other things.
Twitter is where
Well, thank you so much for being here and the great work that you've done.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of friends
Please
in
keep it
Loudon
up.
County. I was keeping tabs on all that and texting back and forth with different families, and the work that you guys did was tremendous.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me.
You bet.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
God bless.
Have a good one.